welcome to this episode 183 of Frame and Reference. You're about to drop into a conversation between me, Kenny McMillan, and my guest, Stephen Murphy, BSC, ISC, DP of Hard Eyes. Enjoy.
What do you guys normally watch?
It depends, it depends. I'm hugely into sci-fi. I'm massively nerdy and geeky, so I'd be into a lot of sci-fi stuff. And Aileen loves a lot of rom-com stuff, but she's got a really eclectic taste as well. We have just managed to just finish watching the very last screener, left over from the BAFTA Oscar season,
Sure.
of 200 and something movies. We sort of rigorously try and go through every single one of them. Admittedly, she'll watch more than I will, but so we kind of have just finished that off, and now it's a clean slate, so start again.
Who did I just? Oh, The Brutalist. Because I know Lal just won a BAFTA for that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I assume you watched that one as well.
I did, yeah. That was one of the first ones. I thought it would look beautiful. I thought it was a really interesting movie. I probably thought the first half of the movie was more interesting than the second half, but I thought it was great to watch. I think this year my favorite movie has probably been Conclave. That surprised me a lot. It's I just don't know if you've seen it, but
no, it's one of the ones that escaped. I mean, I think it's still in theaters, but everyone keeps saying that that's phenomenal.
Yeah, it's kind of something I didn't think I would want to watch, and I sort of grumpily agreed to watch it. And at the end of it, I was like, "That was a great movie, a proper movie." So it's good.
Yeah, I think people's people keep talking about, oh, there's no good movies. It's all like superhero films and shit. It's like I think you're just not watching movies. There's a lot of great ones out right now.
Yeah. There's a lot of. I think there's I've sort of talked about this, funny enough, about Hard Eyes quite a bit, but I think it's a different kind of movies nowadays. I think there's less I think what I would call escapism movies, the stuff that for me in the 80s and 90s was, the Amblin and the you go to the movie theater and you just, fall into a world and you escape and you have fun and you that's for 2 hours. I think that's been replaced by kind of generic Marvel stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're maybe missing that. I think you've now clearly got the Marvel-esque kind of Fast and Furious 19, type movies. And then you've got the serious Oscar contenders. And I think it's a kind of a pity then, because if you don't want to go to the movies and come out crying, you then are either not going or you're going to watch cars crash or the Hulk crash cars, So, yeah, I miss the escapism.
I do too. Well, and I'm the same way about like sci-fi and stuff like that. That's the kind of stuff that made me want to get into filmmaking. Obviously your Star Warses and stuff, but I was just talking with a buddy of mine and name dropped like Dark City and Equilibrium, and he was like, I don't think anyone has seen those, and I was like, but they should.
They totally should. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I know Dark City, when it came out, it was like it flew under the radar, even when it was released. But I remember tracking it down because I was a huge fan of The Crow, and I think the one movie theater that had it in my sort of neighborhood or extended neighborhood, when I went to see it, maybe there was 2 people in the theater with me, and I was just like, wow, this is amazing. But it had a terrible marketing campaign. It just didn't get seen. It's such a pity. If that came out in the cinema right now, people would shit themselves and 100%. It's crazy.
Well, and it's funny. I always love, as you've probably heard, like a big behind the scenes person. I love like interconnectedness and film history and stuff. And what got me to see Dark City was the fact that the opening of The Matrix, I knew because of the special features on that DVD. The opening of The Matrix where Trinity's running away from the cops is just the Dark City set that hadn't been struck yet.
Really?
Yeah.
Skyline, that kind of profile skyline shot where she's running over the rooftop.
Yeah, that's all a Dark City set. And they were just like, hey, can we use that? And they went, yeah, go for it.
Great. I love that. That's one of the best shots in The Matrix. It's fantastic.
Yeah. Well, and it's, dude, I got to see that in for like the 20th anniversary screening in Dolby. And it's shocking how much, like, even the Blu-ray, but the DVD softened up how cheap that movie was. Like when you see it in a theater, and I eventually saw it at Tarantino's theater, on film, same thing. Well, the film helped a little bit, but the digital scan, you can see the walls made out of plywood where they don't meet the floor. It's just like everything is so cheaply made, except the Nebuchadnezzar, really. But yeah, just everything is so you watch it and it's very inspiring in a way because you're like, oh, okay, I could do that.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't a big budget movie when it was made. That was like, two directors who had made a movie beforehand and made a little bit of money off the movie, and they were kind of like over the corner of the world, and the studio executives didn't want to visit or pay attention to, and they were doing their thing, and look how it turned out.
Yeah. Well, and at the time too, Keanu wasn't even like him.
Really?
They're
Not
like, oh,
really.
you got that guy? That's cute. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes. Yeah, that doesn't happen anymore.
Mm-mm. So, like I said before we started recording, I kind of went into Hard Eyes, the sight unseen, and same thing about the marketing. I think the way me and my sister have been trying to tell everyone to go see it, because it is just like one of the most fun films we've seen in a while. But we keep on having to go, it's a rom-com, but there is murder. But it's not a horror film. But it is.
There's a lot of blood.
People be dying, but it's funny. The comedic timing of the main two actors is incredible.
Yeah, it's great. Josh is great at that. He had a really clear handle from the beginning about the tone. And it's the question I asked him first when we, did our meeting together. What's the tone? What way are we aiming for? I'm pretty sure he had that conversation with every single person who he encountered around the making of this movie, because it is an unusual combo of genres, and it's only because he is so deft at handling both the comedy and the slasher side of things that he makes it work so well. And he was very clear from the beginning, at least with me anyway, about how he didn't want to shortchange either genre. He loves rom-coms as much as he loves horror movies, and I think that's what shows through in the final product.
Yeah. Well, and also, speaking of like movies getting made for a low budget, that's like right now when you go to film schools, they tell their students, like, if you want to get something made, make a horror film or a rom-com, because those gets funded really easily. And you guys are like,
yeah,
bet.
So yeah,
do both.
Hold my beer.
Yeah. Was that semi-intentional, like to make sure the thing actually got made, or was it just like, I love those genres, let's smush them together?
No, I think I think the project, the genesis of the project was obviously with the writers, and I think they had sort of moments of inspiration from what I've read and what I've talked to them about it, and they kind of they ran with the idea, and I don't think it was consciously, oh, this will make lots of money or this will be a success. It was more a case of, wouldn't this be an interesting idea if we took this idea of a date gone wrong, and how could it possibly go any worse? And off they went.
Yeah. Well, and just I don't want to like say too much about the film itself in specificity for people who haven't seen it, but I just the simple concept of them going, we're not together, like, is such a funny through line for this whole thing. Just kill somebody else. It's not like, it's so stupid, and I love it. It's great.
It's great. The odd couple.
Yeah. So talk to me about like pre-production on it, because watching it, two things happened, which sucks for me. One, I immediately stopped focusing on the cinematography because I was having too much fun, and I kept on having to like recenter. So you might have to fill in some blanks for me. But the scope of the film feels very large, but it like my memory of it, now that I'm thinking about it, there weren't like too many locations. How are you guys able?
I mean, we were like a 30 35-day shoot, I think, 34, 35, something around that mark.
That seems reasonable.
Um, and during prep, obviously you have the script. The script is still being worked on and adjusted to, as we sort of find locations together, and the locations inspire you to kind of go, oh, you know what, it doesn't say this on the page, but maybe we could do this here, and change the sequence slightly that way, or maybe we could combine these two scenes to work in this one amazing location, and sort of reposition stuff, and so that feeds into what the script and what you're going to do. But in terms of the scope of it, there was always, obviously everyone goes into every project with ambition, but this was very ambitious, and but we were kind of all up for the challenge. We really wanted to sell the 80s, 90s sort of blockbuster horror side of things, or the slasher side of things, in terms of the visuals. And we wanted to shoot anamorphic, which gives it a certain scale. And yeah, so we kind of we sort of reached for the stars. I really like wide shots. I'm always trying to push for wide and wide and wide. Even if they only get used briefly, I just still think it kind of gives you a lovely geography and a lovely sense of scale. So yeah, we had that in mind. And every time we walk into a location, I go stand in the corner and look towards the windows of the light source and think of what's the widest shot we could get in here. And Josh will come over and go, I'm probably going to play this all this way and this way. And I go, yeah, but just have a look at this. Just have a look at this. And then a lot of the time you go, yeah, you know what? Looks pretty good. Let's do it. So, yeah, we definitely had sort of ambitions of grandeur.
Well, it totally makes sense you saying that, because like there's a few shots that come up, like the restaurant where she kind of first meets him. So not the coffee shop, but the restaurant.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And then also the drive-in theater, there's that big swoopy thing. And I don't know why those two, I mean, I know why the drive-in comes to mind, but you do have this way of shooting those wides, those establishing shots in a way that feels very blockbuster, as you said, like very, it definitely adds to the production value of everything, while not even being too flashy. It's just something I don't think you see a lot of. I think people jump in pretty quick these days.
Yeah, I think I mean, Josh and I both love a lot of the same movies from the same periods, the 80s, 90s stuff. We grew up on all of that, like I said, the Amblin stuff and the Spielberg stuff and the a lot of the classic horror movies and things. So we had a lot of the same goals in mind. And when Josh and I started talking about the visuals, he, straight away was talking about the visual idea of blue moonlight. He loves blue moonlight from all those movies. And, that's kind of fallen away a little bit in the last sort of 10 or so years in cinematography, because we've kind of veered towards like a more naturalistic visual style since the advent of, faster sensor digital cameras and all that kind of stuff. And I was, really keen to embrace the blue moonlight, and also embrace like lighting the night scenes, the way they would have been lit in the 90s, rather than maybe the way we, another job might do them now. So that adds to a lot of that sort of richness that you see in this, because you can see it lit. We haven't just turned up at the car park or the drive-in and gone, hey, let's stick a light here for a close-up and let's go with the streetlights. We've actually consciously switched things off or changed out the streetlights to our streetlights and things like that. And I think that definitely gives you that sort of glossier Hollywood, blockbuster visual. You combine that with the anamorphic lenses, and I really love wider anamorphics. I think the longer you go on an anamorphic lens, the less anamorphic it feels. It starts feeling spherical. So we're doing a lot of our, obviously our wides are on the wides, and then we're doing a lot of our coverage on anamorphics, wider anamorphics, but closer to the actors, which means it's a little more dynamic for the camera as well. You can sort of feel the camera moves a little more, and there's a little more energy when you're chasing someone or, preceding someone. And then we saved the longer lens stuff for a few key scenes where we wanted it to feel more romantic. Like the scene at the end or the scene in the restaurant,
Right. I'm so glad you brought that up, because the night is a very both contentious, as you said, but like it's difficult to shoot, even if you've got a 12,800 base ISO, it's very easy to phone it in with that. So I was wondering, I was going to ask you already, like, if you could go into specificity about how you lit the night scenes, because there's a ton of night stuff, which is pretty bold. But obviously, with the drive-in, you've got kind of it's a little softer because you're selling the screen.
That's great.
But yeah, if you could go into like,
so the super
how can we
nerdy
steal that? Yeah,
the super techie version is it kind of all stems from the tests we did when we in pre-production. I was really keen to test the hard eyes mask as soon as possible to see what the colors would look like under the blue moonlight, and to see what we could do, how we could create this character on screen. And the best way to light hard eyes, or that I found to light hard eyes, was with a hard backlight or a hard edge light, because that would catch the texture of the mask, of the prosthetics.
Such a good mask.
It's great, right? A really beautiful design. And there was so much lovely texture sculpted into it that when we, the makeup team added a little sheen to it so that they would just catch the light and skip off it, and you'd get all these nice specular highlights and it would look cool. And then any light that you'd have on his face, you needed that to be, I tried to keep it moving a lot of the time so that he wasn't fully revealed. And sort of the idea of lighting him that way and then lighting the cast in a more complementary way so that they would always look good or always look like movie stars, meant that I was going to use big soft sources for their close-ups. So to kind of make all that work for the amount of nights that we had, because like I said, we had 30 something days, 35 days, which is, not a luxurious schedule. It's not terrible, but it's not luxurious either.
Efficient.
Efficient, yeah. So what we decided to do was I asked Sam Jelly, my gaffer, to look into moving headlights, theater style lights.
Oh, sure.
And he found a bunch of Very lights that we carried on our package. And a lot of the time, say at the drive-in, and it's a great example, we go to the drive-in, and because we were facing the water's edge, it was very difficult finding positions to put traditional cranes to light from. Even if we had all the money in the world, it was still going to be tricky. But there was a whole bunch of street lights, everywhere as far as you could see. So we would pick an axis to shoot on, and we'd know, okay, the set is 180 degrees looking this way and this way. And then Sam could rig all those moving lights on the top of the street lights, and then I could control them from the ground via the desktop. So we could pan and tilt those whatever way we want. So I had 6 backlights, which were all motorized, all moving, covered me in all different directions. And that kind of style started to become the norm for the show. We'd have, if we could get a condor in or a couple of condors in, we'd put the newer sky panels on them. They're called the X23s, the ones that have the sort of more focused lenses on them.
Better than the Orbiter.
The Orbiter is, funny enough, I've never actually used the Orbiter. I've tried it, but I've never sort of used it in anger. But
I love you guys, Ari, but yeah, no one.
Yeah. But the X23 is like a nice sort of punchy backlight, and it's obviously LED and controllable. And yeah, we would use things like that. We took them around corners, put them on buildings. We put them on cranes. A couple of times we needed very, very big cranes, and we'd make a bank of 18Ks, depending on how far away the machines needed to be. It's all very, I don't want to say old school, but it's all very tried and tested ways of lighting night exteriors. It might just be not the way that lots of people have been doing it recently because it's slightly fallen out of fashion. But for me, for my tastes and for the style of the movie, it worked perfectly. That sort of, smoky, sources in the streets and wet down the streets and big backlights and having the lights in shot half the time so they'd flare as the camera panned through them. I think it looks amazing. So we bought into that.
Yeah. I gotta learn how to write faster. I don't think it's actually fallen out of fashion. I think it's fallen out of fashion with filmmakers because it takes a little bit more effort. You gotta block off parts of streets or stuff. I'm fascinated because I think audiences I spend a lot of time on the internet that I probably shouldn't. And I constantly do see discussions about people clamoring for that style of. Usually, that's the example because it's so dramatic, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah,
But there's people go like, "Oh, why do movies look flat?" And they always blame the color grade, and it's like it's
it's the
not.
lighting. Yeah,
It's the lighting,
yeah,
and it's. I don't want to say lazy filmmaking because a lot of times it looks fantastic. It's just easy to do and it's everyone does it because it's easy and looks good,
yeah,
you know.
yeah,
And it
yeah,
can look flat if you're not careful.
yeah. I think with the, part of my sort of tendency to lean towards lighting the nights that way is I've done stuff in the past which has been super dark and super moody, and that's great and it looks great, but it's on the verge of being, gloom or
Yeah.
murky. And, in this case, we wanted everyone to look still, look good, look like movie stars, and we wanted to see the story, and we wanted to still have shape and texture and shadows and dimension to the images, and that is again classic Hollywood night exterior lighting, which I agree. I think everyone still think it looks great. I think it's just I think there's a whole generation of filmmakers that have grown up not knowing how to do that, and maybe that's part of the issue. And the same with it's not just the DPs, it's the production teams too. So you rock into a show and as a DP and you start saying to the line producer, yeah, I'm going to need 4, 5, 6 condors every night for the next 6 weeks. And they're like, holy shit, we haven't budgeted for that.
Right.
But luckily on this, I had an incredible crew in New Zealand, a fantastic production team. And they were like, yeah, great. We know that's how you do night exteriors. So we've allowed for that. So
Yeah. Or if you're on, my end of the budget, it's less the production and more the AD. Just hey, don't set that up. All right.
yeah, the thing is, you work that way, and you need to work fast because, like I said, the schedule's tight, and I have this thing about momentum on set. I really like working fast. I think momentum is really important for the director. It's important for the actors, and I would rather spend longer setting something up so that when we start shooting, I'm spending less time stopping them between takes to relight. So once I can show the production team and the ADs how quick we are by doing this, everyone buys into us. It's like whatever the extra cost is of the machine or access to the roof to put a light on it or whatever it is, it saves us time and money, and gives the director another take or two or another shot or two. And it just helps everybody just stay in a faster rhythm on the day, which everyone appreciates.
Yeah, that's the old Fincher thing in it. Like I was talking to Eigel Burld, and he was talking about because he shot first season of House of Cards, and he was saying that like the camera. I don't know if this changed, but he was saying that the camera car, like all the camera equipment, had to fit in a Sprinter van, and it had to be ready to go in 15 minutes. And like they would pre-light everything, and so when they got on set, it was just like as you're saying, momentum from the jump. Like they're everything's just rigged up, and he's like, as much time as the actors get, like as much time we have, the actors get it. Why are we spending 30 minutes routing a cable? If the cable gets 30 minutes and the actor gets 15, that's ridiculous.
Exactly, exactly. And it's when you work with a really experienced crew as well, they buy into that. They know that. So when I start saying, hey, I've got this crazy idea, I want to do this, lighting setup this way, the gaffer and the rigging gaffer are able to go, okay, the way to make that work time wise is let's do it like this. And they're all conscious of trying to maintain, a good crew is conscious of trying to maintain that rhythm. No one wants to stand around and watch me tell the electrical team how to light a set for the next 2 hours. Not that I'm going to be given that, but it is important for everybody, you, especially night shoots. You're going to do 6, 7 weeks of nights. People's energy starts crumbling. If they feel that we're not wasting time and that they're go 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 all the way, it helps. Everyone's happy with that. We do reasonable hours because we're in New Zealand. Yeah, it's a good way to keep the spirits up.
Yeah. I did want to touch back on the using the movers for a second because I'm actually fascinated by this as like I feel like more people should probably do that. But were you mounting them just 2 light poles, or were you mounting them like where the light normally comes from?
mounting them to the street lights and then switching off the street lights if they weren't in shot.
So basically, in the same place though, where the light actually was.
Above it. So
I
if
see.
I wasn't going to see the light source, if I wasn't going to see the street light source, or if I was, even if I was, depending on what height the street light was at,
Mm.
I could put the moving light sitting right on top of the street light. And if I was going to look right at that street light, I just need to pan that moving light over towards the lens. It flares the lens out because we're in an anamorphic world, so you can't really see that it's a cheated light source. So basically, I'm using the street lights as a poor man's version of a cherry picker,
Mm-hmm.
which
And then,
means I need one cherry picker in the pre-rig to just drive around and do all that instead of needing 6 cherry pickers on the shoot net.
yeah,
I don't need to move them; they're never in the shot. So it means you can pan 180 degrees through all that stuff. You're never seeing any of the chutney, as I call it. The lights are all up there. It means I can control the lights from the ground. I can pan them around if I'm need a bit of extra backlight over here or splash a light in the background over there. It was just really clever, efficient filmmaking for us.
yeah, I'm definitely, well, Lord knows when I'll be at that budget, but I'm stealing it if I if
Either
I
way,
can.
stay away.
But the other thing I'm wondering about, because I'm, a couple years ago I got a color meter and I just became a fucking, quality nerd. The spectral output of those things is like good enough that it didn't look crap on
Oh yeah, no,
camera.
they're great. I mean, again, it depends on, I suppose, which model you go for, but the ones we went, for are very high end, and yeah, it's I don't know, 98, 99% CRI, so it's great stuff. Yeah, it's great. I wasn't necessarily going to use them to light a close up on the floor.
Sure.
That would, but for our purposes of big broad backlights or punchy backlights, they were perfect.
Gotcha. And so you weren't modifying them in any way, you were just hitting people.
Just hitting people, yeah. No diffusion in front of them because again, we kept them as edge lights or backlights, so they were always hard. There is a diffuser built into them that we use quite a bit, which softens the beam a little. It's not anywhere near the same as putting large textile in front of it, but they were never intended to be sort of soft sources. So if we were going to do something softer, we'd use a softbox over the set, or so the movie theater, the drive-in has a 40 by 40 softbox, or maybe it's only 40 by 20 actually softbox above the set, and everything else on the floor was it was still LED because we use LED almost exclusively through the movie. What I was using a lot of, I keep calling them sausages. They're not sausages. They're like an inflatable sock that you can put on made of diffusion that you can put on an Astera tube.
Yep.
So it's kind of like a modern version of an old covered wagon. So you can put them on a stand, you can throw them on the floor. You've got total control over them. They're really soft source. They were great. You could hide those lights really easily. They were great for the night stuff, when you're sort of in horror mode and running around like crazy and trying to hide lights around corners and stuff. And then for the rom-com world, we were more traditional in using, the biggest source we could, or softest, biggest source that we could get as close to the camera as possible. So you had this big romantic key light wrapping around their faces, and usually that was vortexes and stuff through that.
Yeah, I do want to touch on that, but I wanted to show you something that you brought that up. I found for like $30. Have you seen these things? They're like weird.
No, but that looks like a slightly thinner version of the sausages that I'm talking about.
But these are stupid because you blow it up and then it folds up.
Yeah, great.
Like it's
I think I'm trying to think of the name of the brand of what I'm talking about because the manufacturer would kill me. But I think the American version is called an air sock or something like that.
Yeah, I think you're right. Is it DOP Choice who makes them, or
not those guys? There's I can always email you. I can dig out the brand, but I had them on. There's an American gaffer on Mr. and Mrs. Smith showed them to me, and I was like, these are amazing. And I said it then to a UK gaffer, and he was like, oh, the UK version is called something else.
RST Visions?
Could be. Don't know. Honestly, can't remember.
Duplo.
But essentially, it's an inflatable sock in 4 foot, 8 foot, and you just it's like maybe 1 foot in diameter. It's made of diffusion. Stick an Astera tube in there, you're good to go. They just go everywhere.
Yeah, if you Google light sock, they show up.
So. Light sock. That's
Whoever's trying to buy one, that's how you get it.
Yeah. There's my free light sock gone.
Yeah. Oh no, we'll get you the hook. They sell them at Film Tools. We'll air ship them to you. Um, I did want to kind of you brought it up, but I kind of wanted to ask about the beauty world versus the horror world stuff or
Yeah.
slasher stuff
Yeah.
because it's not as defined as you might think. Meaning it the whole film looks cohesive. It's not like you're watching two separate films. So I kind of wanted to know uh A, was that intentional or was that just, because you guys are good at your job? But B, um, using two examples like the coffee shop, like how did you like the coffee shop versus like the police station, for instance?
I mean, in a very different way. They're both very different.
Right.
And a lot of that's driven by the space that you've got in both places. So the police station's a set, so you have a little bit more flexibility there. The coffee shop's a real location. But the kind of needs, the visual needs of the coffee shop are very different from the police station. So a lot of the Josh's sort of two, or in my head, his two keystone images that certainly that I latched onto in prep were the idea of Jason lives for the nighttime, the blue or moonlight stuff, and he had an image from of Tom Hanks from Big, the scene where Tom Hanks goes to the party and tries the blue cheese or the whatever it is, and behind him are these pink curtain shears which look horrendous. But he loved that, and so that was going to be our big date night, our restaurant with the pink curtain shears. And so in my mind, I was trying to make those two ends of the spectrum kind of work. We built our language between those two goalposts, if you like.
Mm.
The thing that kind of carries through between them, even though the color is totally different and the quality of light is different from the rom-com side to the slasher side, is that the lensing is the same, so we're still on the wider lenses and kind of closer to them for almost all of the scenes, and then the idea of trying to keep the actors looking like movie stars is kind of the through line that travels through. I don't normally do that. Normally, I'm like, no, no, no. They can have circles under their eyes, and we can not see their faces, and obviously some people are like, oh, we really want to see their faces, Steve. But but on
So
this
pretty.
movie,
Yeah.
I made it just a very conscious effort to try and keep them looking like movie stars the whole way through. And I play with the amount of shadow that they get in the rom-com side versus the horror side, which is helps define the two looks. But I'm still sort of treating them in a similar way. I know that if I'm in the horror world, I can make the wide shots moody and I can sketch them out with backlights. And then when I get in for a close-up, I know I need something nice and soft to key them. I just don't wrap it around their faces as much on the horror world as I do in the comedy or the rom-com world.
Well, and I kind of want to drill down on the beauty look because I think for a lot of filmmakers that could be a very valuable lesson. With a more conservative lens. What lenses did you shoot?
So we were on these lenses from Panavision. They're anamorphic and they are custom made for somebody else, someone bigger than me that I managed to inherit.
Hell yeah.
They are they're B series anamorphics that they have pulled apart and mated with their modern T series anamorphics. So what it means is you end up getting a lot of the benefits of the mechanics of the modern lenses, like close focus and a kind of a nicer, lighter weight package. But you get some of the beautiful flaring and softening of the older anamorphics from the B series, which really helps with the beauty work and helps with the portraiture. So we had those. Yeah, we were very lucky to sort of land a set of those.
I'm glad you said that because the next thing I was going to say was, like, I'm just proud of myself for picking up on it. I was like, because they're not, they don't fall apart or anything, but they are a choice of a lens. Like they look really cool. And so I was going to say if someone were to pick a more conservative lens, that beauty look absolutely could be on a Super Bowl commercial or something like that. Like it's shot great. So when you say you wanted people to look like movie stars, what did that look like practically on set? When you're setting up the lights and stuff like that.
So again, in the big wide shots, you don't see the lights are all coming from, but usually behind the actors. The key thing for me, I get a little obsessed with it, is I'm always trying to shoot towards the light source or across the light source. I never want the light sources to be behind me. When I say me, I mean the camera.
Mm.
Um, if I can keep the lights, behind the cast or alongside the cast, and they'll always be backlit or side lit, and that's better for them. It's better for the camera. It's better for creating dramatic images. The degree to which I can keep them in shadow or semi silhouetted shadow is depending on the story, whether we're in rom-com world or horror world. So the thing that sort of inspired me was I'm a huge fan of Janusz Kaminski and his work with Steven Spielberg, and I read an article with him a long time ago when he was doing Catch Me If You Can, and he said that on that movie, Spielberg said he wanted it to feel more romantic, like a glass of champagne, and that's kind of what I had in my head when I was trying to shoot the rom-com stuff. I wanted it to be a little sparkly and a little bit beautiful. Not a little bit, a lot beautiful, more beautiful than I'd normally go for. I would normally strive for more naturalism. And, like I said, I have been slapped on the wrist many a time for making everything way too dark. But for the rom-com stuff, I wanted it to be bubbly and beautiful. And I just wanted some of that beauty to then travel through into the horror world.
Yeah, that is such an evocative phrase. I want it to look like a glass of champagne, because that could be interpreted so many interesting ways.
Yeah.
Especially like me being a dumbass immediately goes, oh, glimmer glass. That's how they advertise it.
Right. So like in practice, what that meant for me on Hard Eyes was, if I'm looking at one of the cast, instead of keeping the key light all the way over to one side so that half their face drops off in shadow, which is what we did on the night work, I was bringing that key light closer to the lens so that it would start to fill in more of the shadow, or what would traditionally be the shadow side of the face. It means you get two catch lights in both eyes, and it would just wrap way further around the face than you'd normally do in a drama. When we then do the night work, that same idea of that big soft key light gets pulled back to a side position, or sometimes a sort of a 3/4 back position, depending on how much you want it to wrap and how many eyes you want to catch. And sometimes, depending on the shot, you might, I'd be playing with that with Sam, with the gaffer, going, okay, if we bring it just another tiny bit this way, it'll just catch the second eye, but it won't fill in the shadow side of the face. Or sometimes you'd say, screw it, we don't need the second eye, we can just have one eyelid. So it was that was the kind of dance we played with the key lights, if that makes sense.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, for whatever reason, I was just reminded of it was earlier in the film, so I was still in my analytics mode and not in my having fun mode. But the first, what do you call it? Conference room scene.
Oh yeah.
Where she gets chewed out for blowing it. For whatever reason, I remember going, this room looks lit way better than it should. There's like so many ways you could have done that, and I was like, God damn, like he really is just like making everything look really good. I was wondering if you could tell me like how you came about that, because obviously you've got all those windows that you can makes things look better. But whenever I do like corporate interview stuff, because all the corporate people only think in literal terms, so they go, oh, you're going to interview someone? That's a meeting. You know where meetings happen? So yeah, how'd you get away with making that look nice? Was that a set?
No, unfortunately it wasn't. I really wish it was a set. That was a location, and that was a very beautiful boardroom at the top of the 37th floor, something like that, which meant I had absolutely no control of the weather outside. And in fantastic New Zealand fashion, the sun was in and then out and then in and then out all day long. And it made me cry all day long. That was one of those locations that, I didn't enjoy, but I'm glad that you liked that.
I just felt for you. I knew intrinsically how shit that was.
Sympathy pains.
Yeah.
I mean, essentially what we had to do in that space was try and light the foreground, as in the cast, the actors, to enough of a level that I could then pull as much detail out of the highlights in the background as possible and try and have a little bit of a balance to it. The trick being that every time you turn a light on in that space, you see the light reflected in all of the glass surfaces that are all over that space as well. So it was a little tricky. And it was a tight location by the time you bring the crew up and all the cast and all the extras and stuff. So that was a hard day's work for a
Yeah.
DP
And
and the
were you,
electrical.
yeah, no kidding. Were you sort of just like doing the classic shoot it into the ceiling and just try to go even with it, or were you a little more
No, we were
refined than
able to
that?
shape it again. We it's a kind of an unusual shape space. There's like a slightly sloping roof, and so there's sort of architectural supports along one side of it, one of the window sides. So we could hide some of those lights that we were talking about, those kind of sausage lights, in those places, and you sort of try and disguise their reflections in the background. And sometimes the reflections are still in the shots. They're just on the longer lenses. They're very soft, and so you don't notice them. But that's we had a whole bunch of little tricks that we were using to try and get away with that stuff.
Yeah. Was that the most challenging scene you were faced
Yes.
with? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Even though even it's weird, it's like, oh yeah, it's a bunch of people in the boardroom having a conversation. Actually, from a lighting perspective, that was the most challenging. And there is a light shift in there. Everyone, if you're keen eyed, if you see it, we lose the light at a certain point, and there's nothing we could do to get it back. Yeah, that was hard. Everything else, all the stuff with scale, the scale doesn't phase me. It's when you're working on like large set pieces, you just do them in bite-sized chunks and you just have a plan and you work through it, and that's not hard. What's hard is when you're 40 floors up and you have no control over the tools outside, the sun outside, you've nothing, and you're trying to sort of play that game of balance between what's going on inside and what's outside. That's tricky. It's hard.
Yeah. Well, and I interviewed Greg Frazier about Dune, and he released not all, but like a bunch of his lighting plots
Mhm.
with behind the scenes photos of a bunch of the sets. And the thing that struck me was like it's a shit ton of fixtures. It's like, at times thousands of, I think, vortexes or something.
Mhm.
But if you just kind of step back and look at it as sources and not like fixtures, it's usually just top light, key light, you know,
Yeah.
something for some interest, and that's it. And I was talking to him about that. I was like, this actually gave me a lot of like confidence, because even at a huge scale like this, it is kind of the same. It's always the same thing, you know. You don't got to think of it. It's the gaffer's problem to figure out how many to put up there.
Yes.
Just
I
tell him
mean,
you want
essentially what you're
top light.
doing, like what you're doing in every sort of light scenario is you're trying to replicate one source, or maybe two. You're trying to replicate the sun and maybe the sky and maybe practicals. And that's kind of it, you know. The idea of sort of single source lighting is not new, but it doesn't, the goal of single source lighting doesn't change. Even if you're on a $300 million movie, you just need more units to make a single source work. So as long as you, again, like I said with the scale thing, as long as you break it all down into components, you might have, like I said, 6 or 7 moving heads on streetlights, but you're not trying to make all of those 6 or 7 heads work at the same time. You're trying to make it feel like there's a single source, and some of them are doing it when you look this way, and you turn around and some of them are doing it that way. The simpler you make it is usually, better. Simple is better usually in lighting terms.
Yeah. I did want to ask about you'd kind of brought it up earlier, but like for contrast and for education, like what was kind of maybe one of the more like indie setups you had, and or like executions, and one of the more sort of like Hollywood ones, if you will.
Let me think about it. I suppose the more Hollywood stuff is the just generally the night exteriors where we, or some of the set pieces like the carousel or
Mm.
the drive-in theater where we have, larger setups. You've got bigger cranes and a lot more lights and more cameras and stuff like that. In terms of indie, let me see. My memory's terrible, so I'm kind of racing
Too, dude.
through stuff.
Well, I'll give you
Uh,
a second, because I did want to bring up. I'm pretty sure I remember seeing like at least a source in the background, and like the or maybe I just felt it, but I feel like I saw it. And I honestly think that's very Hollywood as well. Like when I think of like Terminator 2 or whatever,
100%.
there would always be
Yeah.
just you can see the lights right there, and it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, there she is.
Yeah, yeah, and it's something I love doing that. Josh loves it. It made some people nervous, and I was like, I literally went home that night and came into the set the next day to show a few people a bunch of photographs from West Side Story, Spielberg, and I was like, dude, there's a Musco in that shot and a Wendy light in that shot, and it's the same shot. If it's okay for Spielberg, it should be okay for us. And me and Josh were loving it. It's a very it's Michael Bay thing as well,
Yeah.
but it's a John McTiernan thing, and I'm a huge John McTiernan fan, so I think especially if it's anamorphic and you're getting these, movie lights in shots, and it's not, if it's a 200-foot crane and it's like, the other end of the street, kind of could be a street light, maybe, or you try and hide the crane arm as much as you can. I don't want to see the crane arm, but I don't mind seeing the head, the unit, especially if it's flaring the lens and it doesn't say, Arri or something on the side of it. It's just a lens flare, like, a street light. So, yeah, it doesn't bother me at all. And I just, like I said, I think it's got energy. If the camera pans through that, sees that, it flares, pans over here, sees a little bit of that. It's beautiful. It's great.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you could do that even on an indie budget, especially now you're working at low AS or high ASAs, low light levels. You could stick a parkan on the rooftop of a building and point it right at the camera and, feel a little bit of a nice lens flare.
Yeah, or even these days, there are some LED flashlights that are
Oh, yeah.
way too bright, and you just get your
Oh, yeah.
buddy on the second floor of a building poking out the
Yeah.
window.
I mean, funny enough, because you touched on it earlier on, one of the things with the idea of us lighting the night exteriors in a kind of an older school fashion is when you decide to shoot at like 12,500 ASA, you spend a lot of time flagging light and controlling light that you don't see when you're, if you're doing it my way, if you're doing the hard eyes way where we've lit the set and we're working to a controlled T-stop, that helps your contrasts hugely, which helps sort of the apparent sharpness of the image a lot. And it gives you a lot more snap to the image. If I was at a higher ISO and wasn't lighting it that way, or working off the street lights, you're having to work to shape the lights a lot and to control the spill from like everything. The lights from the shops or the car headlights as they drive by. Stuff like that. It's just a different way of doing it. It's not necessarily right or wrong. It's just different.
I personally have been shooting at lower. I primarily shoot Canon just because I own them, and their base ISO is actually like 160. They tell everyone it's 800, but that's just because of the latitude. But I've just been shooting at like 400, just to force myself to give it a little more contrast, because even
Yeah.
the negative, quote unquote, in most log formats is still too not flat, but like it's like we have too much latitude. When people I need more dynamic range, I'm like, I don't think you do. I think you need to plan better.
Yes, exactly, exactly. I think the last couple of years, all the stuff I've been doing has been a mix of our mostly Alexa 35 and Sony Venice 1 or 2, and I have leaned towards higher ISOs, not because I need the light or because I need the sensitivity. It's because I'm really keen on stressing the sensor, and in the same way that with 35 mil, I rarely shot 35 mil at its vanilla setting. I'd always be pulling it or pushing it because I think it performs in a more interesting way when you push it around a little bit. And I think it's the same with some of the digital cameras, especially the Sony Venice and the Alexa 35. They're so good. But I think they're more interesting, at least to my eye, they're more interesting when you try and break them a little bit that way. And then it means, on that last job I've just done, did last year was a studio job, almost all interiors and a big set. Venice 2, we were at 3,200, no, 2,500 maybe for the whole movie. And it meant I could just ND everything down. So for the wide shots, I could pull the ND and shoot it as wide open as I want to. And then when we go into the mediums and the close-ups, I can, get a bit more stop. And It's, better for the focus pullers, better for the lenses. Means you have all the snap to the image. You're not sort of struggling with the mechanics of the lens. But when I want it to be a little wider and a little softer, I can just pull the ND and I get total control over it. So yeah, it's part of it as well as me, with a bit of experience, learning that the lenses love light, and they're not designed to necessarily have you run around shooting everything at T1, at 12,800 ASA. That's a look, and it can look really beautiful, but it's not the look that, I necessarily want to go for on a movie like this.
Yeah, be bold, shoot like a f4.
Yeah, yeah, that's it. I think we had, going to say most of our movie was 2.8.5, between 2.8.5 and a 4, even all the night exteriors.
Yeah, it's funny, like going back and reading all of the American cinematographers, and kind of at the beginning when you were talking about like it's not things falling out of fashion or whatever. It's like this formula has worked for so long, and then technology, and I feel like it's the same problem with TVs. The TV salesmen are always like, it can do whatever the fuck, and you watch it on the screen and or at the Best Buy or whatever, and they've got it on demo mode, and everything's flashy. It's like, but the thing we liked this whole time hasn't changed.
Yeah.
Why are you changing it? So it's, just read a American cinematographer from even like 2005, and it, not that long ago. And it's like, it's the same techniques from the 70s, from the 90s, they all look good.
Yeah.
Shooting it like 2.8 or whatever, when that was wide open.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that controls your image, or that will influence your image the most, is never going to be, by and large, it's never going to be the lens or the camera or a filter or a light. It's your lighting. And I think when you learn enough that you've got enough of a sense of control over that lighting, that's what's going to affect your image the most and give you the most, visual difference.
Yeah. Were there, I know you mentioned a couple of them, but were there any other influences for Hard Eyes that you guys like purposefully looked at and said, like, maybe let's not do this, let's lean more into this?
I don't think there's we sort of talked around about, again, in a sort of a tonal conversation, about the violence wanting to be fun. Josh never wanted to make, something nasty. He wanted it to be fun. So we were kind of talking about some movies in the way, oh, that's, not necessarily the visuals, but more the tone. That's too violent. That's not what we're going for. But, we would trade a lot of different references. We talked a lot about Sam Raimi stuff. I'm a huge fan of Medieval Dead, Evil Dead 3. He loves Darkman. And even though the movie doesn't look like either of those movies, it's more the sort of the sense of fun that Sam has in those movies, with the film, the story, and the filmmaking. The practical effects and stop motion puppetry and model making and prosthetics and stuff. We talked about other stuff like Monster Squads. We're both big fans of Monster Squad. Again, it's a great sort of fun movie. It has a great look, like a beautiful night exterior look, where you can see everything, but it's still moody and, kind of scary. We were talking about stuff like that, yeah, a lot. And a lot of that is not, I think it's really important with references that you don't sort of take them too literally. You don't sit down and sort of clone it, because then you're just cloning something. You're not really making your own version of it. I think it's more important that you sort of discuss this stuff broadly or loosely and let it sort of infuse into your way of thinking, but not become your literal way of thinking,
Yeah. Well, and on every job, right, you gotta not necessarily experiment, but there needs to be some form of risk on your part in terms of, trying something, not leaning back on everything. I mean, sometimes you got to lean back, for speed reasons, or it just works. But I'm always trying to, as you said, like, not clone something, because that's not fun artistically, enjoyable. It's making your own thing is what we want to do, right?
Yeah. You want to, in our case, we wanted it to evoke a certain feeling. We wanted it to, we wanted people to go, oh, it's like a 90s slasher movie, or it's like a 90s rom-com movie. And we've done that. We've absolutely done that. But if you were to literally side by side it with a 90s movie, not that I've done this, it would be different. You know,
Sure.
it's our version of that, or of our memory of that. And sometimes that's its own thing altogether as well, you know?
Yeah, my sister actually has been pitching it to all her friends as it's a lot like Scream.
Yeah, yeah. Right. So, and I wonder generationally, if you said that to somebody, you said it to me, and I think of the original Scream, because that's what I want to see, you know, like Matt,
That's what she means. Yeah, we're both
you
about
know,
the same age.
but does she, you know, there's a whole bunch of people that will take that as, oh, the Scream from whatever it was, 2006, 2007, you know, it's,
Or even they just remade it, right? There was one in like 2022 or something.
yeah, yeah. But yes, Scream is definitely, funny enough, it's not actually something I recall us talking about in prep, you know, much. It wasn't either of us going, oh, it needs to look like that. But my memory of Scream, and I haven't seen it in quite a while, and Scream 2 as well, is that they were both gorgeous looking, anamorphic horror movies where everyone was great. You know, the cast stayed great looking throughout the whole thing. It felt lush and big budget and, you know, anamorphic-y. And so there's definitely some of their visual DNA sort of rubbed off on us. Um, but it wasn't necessarily what Josh and I were discussing, you know, as something for us to watch, you know.
Yeah, I think from her perspective, it was more just like tonally, where it's not. I
Yeah.
wouldn't call Scream a horror film, you know, but
Yeah.
it's the same thing of like there's certainly tension, but
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it's a hell of a lot of fun.
yeah, yeah, exactly. I've been asking now because we're coming up on time. I been asking because I keep forgetting to do this with people who have, you know, joined the ASC, joined the BSC, all these international organizations. I always like to know like what was it that got you there? Because I feel like a lot of DPs, that is one of the maybe not one of the goals, but one of the things where you're like, all right, I'm on the right path. I've I made it into there, you know. So what
Sure,
got
sure.
you into, because you're in two, right? ISC, BSC.
Yeah, Irish and British. Yeah.
So which was first, and how'd you get into both?
The British came first. So I was living in London for a long time. I've only recently moved back to Ireland. So the British one came first, and the Irish one came a couple of weeks later, by coincidence. And the piece of work that I think got me in, although you'll never know because with both of the societies, and it's probably the same for the ASC, you submit like a range of work, and there's a panel that will discuss it, and you know, a lot of people are asked to resubmit, you know, maybe in a year or two, kind of later down the way. But you're never kind of, you're just told you've committed, you've been accepted, or you need to come back, you know, and try again. But you're never sort of given any feedback on the specific, oh, we loved that movie and that's why you're in. But I have sort of after I got in, a few of the people, you know, kind of made a few comments to me. And I think the piece of work that got me into the BSC was a miniseries called Death and Nightingales, which has
Mm.
Jamie Dornan in it. It's the complete opposite of Hard Eyes. It's a period piece. Um, it was a really fantastic piece of work to do. It's quite hard to track down in the US, I think. It was done by the BBC. We had a great director, and we had again, it was a great experience. It was a great crew, which is very like Hard Eyes. You know, great team around me. Um, and yeah, it was my chance to do a kind of a classic, you know, English period piece set in Ireland. And it turned out really well. We had just a great time. And like I said, it was everyone was rowing in the right direction. So it made the job really easy to do.
It's making me think of, you know, how like when a movie comes out and you're like, oh, this is for the Oscar voters. It's like you make a, you know, a British, you know, classic British thing, and they're like, oh, he did it, into the BSC you come, you know.
That's it. That's it. Check that box.
Yeah, got him. Um, well, I really appreciate. I'm gonna have to try to find that series if I can. I really appreciate you.
Death and Nightingale. It's really good.
Yeah, I very much appreciate you coming on the show and chatting. It was a lot of fun, and like I said, the movie was phenomenal, and I've just been telling everyone to watch it. I've been telling everyone to watch that and The Brutalist. It's like pick one, different weeks.
Very different. Yes, very different. Yeah.
But
Great,
yeah,
thanks for
man.
having me. Right.
Of course, yeah. Next time you want to chat, just let me know. I'd love to have you back.
Cool. All right, no problem.
Frame and Reference is an Owlbot production, produced and edited by me, Kenny McMillan. If you'd like to support the podcast directly, you can do so by going to frameandrefpod.com and clicking on the Patreon button. It's always appreciated, and as always, thanks for listening.